Hello and welcome everyone to this first webinar. We're just about to kick off this webinar. This webinar session that is hosted by the blockchain Z. Today we are going to talk about money fungibility and its implications for cryptocurrencies. This presentation will explore fungibility as a characteristic of money and apply lessons from history and economics to understand fungibility and cryptocurrencies more generally. Before we kick off this webinar, I would like to give a little bit of like a housekeeping for the webinar. We want the audience to participate and ask questions. To ask questions, please use the Q&A box on the bottom right side of your Zoom application, and your questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. I will now hand you to Victoria, who will give us an update on the blockchain Z.
Hi all, my name is Victoria and I'm currently one of the board members of Blockchain NZ. I would like to take this opportunity, and I promise only 3 minutes of your time, to first of all welcome you to tonight's event and webinar and say a massive thank you for registering and actually supporting Blockchain NZ and our initiatives. Secondly, I would really love to say a massive big thank you to Will, our host tonight, and of course Emile, the key guest speaker. We are very grateful for Emile's time and for his agreement to obviously share with us his knowledge on the topic of money fungibility and its implications to crypto. I'm sure we will all learn at least 3 things tonight, which will be great food for thought, no doubt. And lastly, I would like to inform you that Blockchain New Zealand has actually had a real cool, significant milestone about last week in relation to its governance. So last Thursday, 4th of June, an email went out calling for nominations to its members, calling for nominations for people to be represented on the Executive Council, or to give them an opportunity to have a seat on the Executive Council. Now, just so you're aware, the nominations will close on Thursday, 25 June, which is about 2.5 weeks from now on. So that's Thursday, 25th of June. Now, the important question is, what does it actually mean for you? And well, if you're interested, or you know somebody who might be interested in having a seat on the Executive Council, it is time to nominate yourself or that person. Now, there are 9 positions available, or 9 seats available at the table, across corporate, SME and startups, government, and educational membership categories. Now, that does mean that in order for you to qualify, you do need to be a member of Blockchain NZ in one of those categories. And for your information, our members are currently set out on Blockchain New Zealand website. So please feel free to check that out, and I will leave the relevant hyperlink in the chat box for you to visit later on. We will also be happy to have a conversation with you in case you need assistance with joining Blockchain NZ in order to be considered a member. And if you have any questions and you really want to get in touch, please feel free to contact elections@blockchain.org.nz. I will leave that in the chat box as well for you. Alternatively, feel free to browse the Blockchain NZ website. There is a page with the current board members and my face will be there. Feel free to click on my face. You'll be taken to my LinkedIn, and I'm more than happy for you to connect with me directly and ask me any questions that you may have. I will leave the relevant link to that as well in the Zoom chat for you. That's all from me, folks. Many thanks again for your attendance tonight, and I really hope you have a lovely evening. Enjoy. I will now hand over to Will.
Thanks, Victoria. And I will just have a short introduction now to our illustrious guest speaker, Emile Phaneuf. Emile has a long career in business and economics, and he is, by his own words, a life learner economist. More than 10 years, he's got more than 10 years in exporting international business development positions in both mining and fast consumer goods industries. Emile has also lived in a number of countries as diverse as the United States, Brazil, Japan, and now has been living in New Zealand with his family. He holds a master's degree in economics and political science, and he is, of course, because of all of that travel a polyglot that speaks both English, Portuguese, and Spanish. The current work he is dedicated to as a economics and policy writer, and he writes on the characteristics of money and monetary policy at a New Zealand iconic brand, The Asset. He also defines himself as a fan, but not necessarily only of the Austrian School of Economics, and its leader, Friedrich August von Hayek. In the blockchain space, Emile looks for decentralized solutions wherever possible, especially when it comes to solving hard issues in the governance. I will now hand over to Emile for this presentation. And again, I would like to encourage the audience to ask as many questions as possible in the Q&A box, and we will be moderating everything from there. Thank you. Over to you, Emile.
Okay, first let me do a sound check. Everybody can hear me? Okay, thank you. All right, thank you everybody for joining. I'm happy to be with you. Yeah, so what is this thing of fungibility? Why did I get interested in it in the first place? So a few years ago, when I started learning a little bit about Bitcoin and when people started telling me about it, some of the things I kept hearing was it's fungible, blah, blah, blah. That was one of the things it had going for it. So I spent a good bit of time thinking about that. Fungibility is merely just one property of money. There are a number of others. There's durability, there's portability, relative scarcity, and divisibility, right? So durability, something strong, something that doesn't break easily. We know paper currency tears easily, but the central banks replace old notes with new notes. We know that gold might seem like it's not very portable, right? In terms of it seems it's heavy, right? But indeed, it has 1 ounce of, 1 gram of gold. I don't know if the presentation's going. It seems to be a delay, but let's try again. Anyway, the delay. Sorry, but 1 gram of gold, as you see here, that's worth about $45 US, right? So if we think of the value of gold per gram of weight, you can actually transport a lot of value with a very small amount of weight and dimension. So these are some different characteristics, some different properties of money or currency. And I'll use money and currency interchangeably in this presentation for simplicity. Most people do, but some economists get a little technical, but money currency for this presentation, much the same thing. So when I was trying to figure out why people kept calling Bitcoin, for example, fungible, and why some economists were calling even fiat US dollars and New Zealand dollars, sovereign currency, fungible, I was trying to see what other economists were saying about it. Right. So the first thing I went to was I went to Gregory Mankiw's books. Gregory Mankiw in the United States, his textbooks are the most widely used textbooks. So I looked inside 3 of his textbooks, including his Principles of Economics, which I would assume had something on fungibility, but I couldn't find anything. But I also went to some Austrian economists, Murray Rothbard and Ludwig von Mises. In Ludwig von Mises' book, The Theory of Money and Credit, he does mention fungibility, I think, on the first page of chapter 3, but he doesn't mention it anymore. Murray Rothbard mentions it in passing, doesn't break down a definition or anything in his big 1,400-page economics treatise called Man, Economy, and State. He did have some interesting things to say about money and how people value different goods. For example, he mentions that cows, for example, are not homogeneous. So people value cows differently, right? They'll have a different market price. It's hard to really treat cow as a commodity, just cow. What is that? You have to break it down a little bit. They have different weights. They have different abilities to produce different quantities of milk and different quality and things like that. He also, Murray Rothbard also mentioned something interesting. He said, this is sort of the radical subjectivist view of Austrians. You would expect an Austrian to say something like this, that if two goods are indeed homogeneous by every way that you can distinguish, if a person tends to prefer one or the other, at the moment in which they choose the one versus the other, then they become two different goods. Again, that's the Austrian radical subjectivist view. He also says something interesting about ice during the summer versus ice during the winter, right? So his view is that ice during the summer is a different good than ice during the winter. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that, to be honest, but there is certainly different utility, different let's say, pleasure that someone might get out of drinking ice during the summer versus ice during the winter for obvious reasons. But I was still looking for a definition, so I found a couple of places that did have definitions. One is from The Economist. You go to economist.com, and you can find a definition. They have a dictionary on their website, and they mention equal value between assets, right? And they also mention the word indistinguishable, right? So if two units of the same monetary unit of the same currency, if you don't prefer one or the other, then you've achieved fungibility, right? So, and there's something else in fungibility that if you lend someone $50, you don't care which $50 bill someone pays you back in, right? They can pay you back in 2 20s, 2 5s, right? Or they can just right. So what I'm going to argue in this webinar is not necessarily that not only fiat currencies and not only certain cryptocurrencies, it isn't the case that you necessarily have to get the same one back that you lent to someone else, right? I'm just gonna argue that that in some cases, maybe some isolated cases, you definitely would not want to be paid back with a particular one. And if that's the case, that certainly not in any strict sense of the word, that the currencies are fungible. It's also important to mention that even if a particular currency isn't completely fungible in any strict sense of the word, that it could rank highly in other properties of money well enough that it would still be a good currency. Right, there are currencies that are not completely fungible, but they do well enough in these other properties of money. So that doesn't mean that you just reject the currency. I just happen to find fungibility interesting, so I have a little bit to say about it. Where we at? All right, so when you get into definitions, again, you talk about homogeneity and indistinguishability. But when you get into the implications of this, we get into mutual substitutability. In other words, you don't necessarily prefer one over the other. And if you indeed don't prefer one or the other, you don't care which one you get paid back in, then you've achieved the fungibility. So I'm going to argue that if the closer we get to homogeneity, the less you care. And when you don't care, you've achieved something closer to fungibility, right? Yeah. All right, let me change the slide. All right, so there's a famous paper that was published back in 1945 by, I think it was a British economist, that he was serving in I think the British military, I don't know what branch, but he got caught by the Nazis and he was held in a POW camp. And fortunately, it certainly seems, because I found his paper fascinating, that certainly seems he had economic training before he went in, because he knew what to look for. He knew what was interesting, and he apparently was taking notes or something, because he wrote this beautiful paper. And he observes what he calls the lively trade in all commodities, right? So it wasn't so much the case that people were trading their sovereign or fiat currencies for goods and services. These are different people of different countries, different allied countries, branches of military service, needing a money right? But not trading sovereign currency between, but rather they're trading other things that they had around them, right? So some of the goods that were traded as a money or as a currency were Red Cross food parcels. So tinned milk. What were some of the others? Sugar, coffee, things like that. Some things that you see in the image there. But the currency that spontaneously emerged as a winning currency was in fact cigarettes, right? And this isn't this isn't an unusual phenomenon, actually. I can refer you to at least one other book. If anyone contacts me, I can refer you to the book where cigarettes are also used as a currency in prisons. So this tends to be a trend. People notice that cigarettes are pretty good for currency when you're locked down with a bunch of other strangers, right? He also mentions that well, okay, there's something in economics called Gresham's law, and generally speaking, Gresham's law is like it tends to be under the context of, let's say, coin debasement. So let's say if the king of Spain, if he decides that he's going to take this gold coin and he's going to sneak some brass or some copper and mix it in there, hoping people don't notice. Once people do notice, Gresham's law says that bad money drives good money out of circulation. So, which means that if the king says that this gold one and this gold one that's mixed with copper have equal value, and all the merchants have to take them as equal value, well, which one am I going to pay for stuff with? I'm going to get rid of the ones that it has a lower market value, the one mixed with copper, and I'm going to take this full gold one and I'm going to go sell it in France or somewhere else where the king isn't making such a a silly rule, right? Or I'm going to sell into the black market where I'm living, right? And get my full metallic value out of that, the gold one, right? Now, some people would say that, and I gave this talk a couple years ago, and someone said this, and I think maybe under a strict definition they're right, is that Gresham's law only refers to when the state is doing it. It doesn't refer to something that you might find where people are operating under the state, like with cigarette money and this kind of thing. And Murray Rothbard, the same guy I mentioned previously, he actually says it that way. He says Gresham's law is better stated that money undervalued by the state, money overvalued by the state runs money undervalued by the state out of circulation, right? So that's the moving gold, selling it in France where you can get a higher value. But without that strict definition, just more widely, what we saw in this particular POW camp under R.A. Radford's paper, he says that that cigarettes, the ones that were hand rolled tended to be smoked, where the ones that were machine rolled, industrialized, were traded in currency. So apparently people preferred, for smoking purposes, they preferred the hand rolled ones. You could roll a fatter one or something, right? And the machine rolled, and in fact they're more homogeneous, so it's easier to value, to do cost calculations with them. But those tended to be traded. Yeah, and in fact, cigarettes were so popular as a currency that although there were all these different currencies going back and forth, and this very sophisticated, you might call it a barter economy. In fact, not barter, because we're using actually money with goods. With cigarettes were so common that even though other people were trading in other goods, everything was priced in terms of cigarettes. So if you wanted to do cost accounting, you wanted to know what the price of this versus that, you could break it down. You could break everything down into the going price in cigarettes, right? So pretty interesting. I also know in prison systems that people trade stamps. In California in 2005, they said they got rid of cigarettes. Inmates can't do cigarettes. So very quickly, stamps became the new default currency. Also, some other prison systems, they tend to use like ramen noodles. Ramen noodles tends to be one that people use. There's a whole book on just that, ramen noodles in prisons. And yeah. Anyway, so that's POW camps. Next, let's go to sovereign currency or fiat. So there's some different reasons why fiat one might not be of equal value to someone than someone else. The more obvious reason is of course, paper tears easily. That's not necessarily even the fault of the issuing government or its central bank. That's just, stuff tears, and they would say, hey, but we replace it, and that's true. They'll replace it if you get a wrinkled one, right? But certainly in the market, if you're a vendor and someone wants to give you one that's all ripped up or whatever, you might say, okay, look, I agree that a dollar's a dollar, but just don't pay me in that one, right? So in a strict sense, it might be said that that's not truly fungible, not even the fault of the state, just it's a different one, right? Another thing is that these serial numbers, people don't scrupulously analyze serial numbers before they receive payments. But if you happen to know that someone that wants to pay you something, let's say he or she deals in drugs, knowing that law enforcement often tracks serial numbers, you might say, I don't want those. I don't want those, right? So, and this is a similar phenomenon that I'll discuss in the next section with Bitcoin, with its open ledger. You can know some details about it, so you might not value them equally. Before I move to cryptocurrency, let me give you something interesting. In 1980, when the world cut off Saddam Hussein, the international community cut him off. Before that, he was getting his Iraqi dinars. He was getting them printed in Britain, and he was getting them engraved in Switzerland. And once he lost his supply, because Britain and Switzerland cut him off too. Once he lost his supply, he quickly started printing his own with inferior printing presses, inferior equipment, and maybe knowledge as well on issuing currency. And something that just fascinating that happened was that you had two different price levels going with the Iraqi dinar. You had the ones that were older, that had been made in Switzerland, that had a higher purchasing value. You could buy more with them than you could with, and they're both endorsed by the state. They're both official. It's not like one's counterfeit and the other is not, but they were both official. But people liked the higher quality ones that had been printed in Britain and engraved in Switzerland, in higher buying power. So between these two, you certainly didn't have fungibility. One was preferred more in the market than the other one. Another thing in the U.S., for example, it used to be that all what we call in the U.S., Americans call quarters, these 25-cent pieces, quarter dollars, they used to be all in silver, and then they started being filled with coins, and I think silver plated filled with copper, and then silver plated, at least said to be silver plated, I think. And certainly you can tell most of it's just copper. You can see all the copper. And the state, according to the state, these were both worth exactly 25 cents. But of course, that's not what happened. Gresham's law applies again. What are you going to do if the state says they're both equal in value? You're going to spend the one that's copper, and you're going to keep the 25-cent piece as a collector's item, or you're going to sell it for a higher value for a coin collector who's going to give you the price as a collector's value, or at least the going rate for silver for that weight. So that's fiat currency. So my view is, for a number of reasons, fiat isn't in any strict sense, at least most of the time. It's certainly not fungible either. Bitcoin. All right. So the next thing is that because Bitcoin has a public ledger, as we call it, because you can see the timestamps, because you can see the inputs, the values coming in, the values going out of a particular address, if you happen to know the address, because you can see these things, and you can sort of see the history of where Bitcoins have been spent in the past. You might just care. You might not want Bitcoins coming from somebody. This particular, I borrowed this from, I think, a CoinDesk article, which was said to be a screenshot from, I think, Bitfury's Crystal Pro, I think is the. So this is a blockchain analytical service. So if you look on the left, there's some alias where this blockchain analytical service, it goes through, it finds this alias called WannaCry, somebody, I don't know, somebody in the on the dark net selling illicit drugs or something. They notice this WannaCry alias, and they're like, haha, that's definitely a wallet associated with someone with illegal activity. So you'll notice as it goes slowly to the right, you go from red to orange to yellow, and then you get to green, right? So it's not necessarily suspected that the person all the way on the right who's in the green, that person's involved in illicit activities. But if you go back 2 or 3 levels, it's certainly associated with a wallet that's suspected of illicit activities. Why does this matter? It matters because these blockchain analytical services, not only Bitfury, but there's another one called Chainalysis. They consult for governments, right? So they, a couple years ago, I actually found on the IRS's website. Sorry, I'm in New Zealand. The IRS is like the IRD in the US. I'm sure everybody knows that, but the IRS on its vendor website, I actually saw Chainalysis and saw. As a matter of transparency, you can verify that the IRS have paid Chainalysis hundreds of thousands of dollars, right, to go through, right? Okay, so some governments are looking, the FBI or tax agencies, they're trying to find the history of coins, right? But also there's a Bitcoin payment system called BitPay, BPP, Bitcoin Payment Processor. So if you were to go try to buy a bicycle from someone in a store that would accept cryptocurrency, if they happen to be using BitPay, it's at least rumored, there's a whole Reddit on this, it's at least rumored that BitPay, in fact, scans looks for known tainted coins and coins that have been used in the past in some illegal activities or illegal gambling, that kind of thing. And if your Bitcoins happen to be associated with one of those, let's say, I don't know, 2, 3 levels, 2, 3 transactions back or however many back, they'll in fact say, whoop, don't take it from this guy. So it might indeed be the case that most people don't care where their Bitcoins come from. A Bitcoin is a Bitcoin, kind of like a dollar is a dollar, as they say, right? But certainly as the merchants, even if the merchants don't care, if the payment processors care, and if the tax man cares, and if everyone else cares, then suddenly you'll notice that over time people's behaviors will change, and they'll want to, if someone owes them money, they'll want to say, okay, can you send it through this service, or can I get your address, run it through this service so I can make sure your coins aren't tainted? Yeah. And there's also a little thing called mixing services. I don't know the names of any. I've never used them. But apparently, if you're trying to wash your coins, if you suspect that your coins have been used in illegal activity or something like that, you can send your Bitcoins to a mixing service, and then they send you back in multiple transactions. They send you back slightly less than you sent, right? And the idea is you're getting new fresh coins, right? Why would they give you slightly less? For 2 reasons. One, apparently you have to pay the mixing service for their services back, right? And the other being that if the sum of all the transactions that you get back, if they don't exactly equal what you put in, then it's harder to trace for analytical services, right? I also know someone who used to run a Bitcoin mining pool, and he said that someone contacted him off the internet years ago and said and offered to buy his Bitcoins from him, newly fresh minted Bitcoins, and we're willing to pay for those new freshly minted Bitcoins with Bitcoin, but they wanted to pay him more older Bitcoins for the amount that they wanted in return for new Bitcoins that didn't have a history of any kind, right? The ones that freshly minted ones. So for among all these reasons, and probably others that I haven't even thought of, certainly it's not the case that that Bitcoin is fungible, because one Bitcoin is not homogeneous to another Bitcoin, unless they're both freshly minted or something. In that case, sure. But yeah. So so this brings me to the next thing. And by the way, I'm going to get into privacy coins now, but this isn't even an endorsement of privacy coins or of any particular privacy coins. None of that's the point. It's only that sort of my logic in my thinking about fungibility over time sort of led me to think about particularly Monero as certainly more fungible in terms of properties of money. So Monero I find particularly interesting just because its blockchain is not not public. It's not a public ledger in the same way that that Bitcoin's is. So it's all dark. It's privacy, right? You can't know much about what happens. There are a couple of exceptions. One is that there is a proof of payment option. So if I give somebody a transaction ID and a secret transaction key, if I want to prove to them that I paid them, I can say, here's this and here's that, and they can go and they can see, he did indeed pay me, right? And it still obfuscates, it still hides the sending address. So they still won't even know who sent it. They'll just know that that you indeed are able to prove that you paid them. Another thing is Monero has an optional transparency option, right? So I can show somebody if I want. I have to go out of my way to do it. I can share them with them what's called a view key, and if they have this view key, they can find all the history of that particular wallet address, all the incoming transactions, but they can't see any of the future transactions, right? But Monero is the privacy is on by default, and you have to go out of your way to make it more transparent. I would argue that this certainly puts Monero much closer to what we call fungible. If you can't possibly know anything about any individual unit of currency, you have no particular reason to distinguish, to prefer one Monero versus another Monero, if that makes sense. Last, as a benchmark for Monero, is Zcash. So Zcash is another privacy coin, and Zcash, the interesting, most important difference between Zcash and Monero is that Zcash is by default, just most of the time, if you try to use it for normal purposes, it's not private. For most purposes, it works just like Bitcoin. It has a public ledger. You can go find the past transactions of particular coins. You can find the date stamping and the quantities of previous transactions and all that. So that's Zcash. If you want to use Zcash with the Jax wallet, or I think the Bread wallet, if you want to use it with different wallets, they don't even offer the option to do what Zcash calls shielded transactions. You can't hidden, right, transactions in the same way that Monero does just by default, right? In fact, if you want to send shielded transactions from what's called a shielded address, you need to be running a full node. And so what that means for people that might not know is that that you have to be running a full copy of the blockchain on your device. But given that the Zcash blockchain is currently 23 gigabyte and is not going to get smaller at any time soon, indeed, Zcash, it certainly isn't. It's not. Most people are using transparent transactions, and it's mostly just like Bitcoin. That's not even for me. I'm not even saying anything against Zcash. Again, fungibility is only one property of several properties of money, and actually I find utility. I've never used either, but I find utility. I see something going for it. Yeah, but let's see. So this brings me to conclusions, and that's just basically, so seashells are not homogeneous. Tin past currencies, tin ingots are not homogeneous. Stones, beads, these are not very homogeneous. Maybe machine rolled cigarettes are closer to homogeneous, and therefore get closer to fungible. Bitcoin, no. Monaro, yeah, maybe. Gold, yes. A friend of mine used to work in gold, and he confirmed with me that indeed 23 or 24 karat gold from South Africa is the same for all purposes as 24 karat gold from Texas, from a mine in Texas. So gold does really well in terms of fungibility. But interestingly, I read this. I think it was on Investopedia, which is actually a really good site. It's not like Wikipedia. It's not anybody can edit it. Apparently gold under the Federal Reserve, New York gold vault. I've actually been there years ago as a tour, and they've got billions and billions of gold bars just stacked one on top of another. And the Federal Reserve offers a service to other central banks around the world, and will hold, I don't know, France's sovereign gold there, or other. Actually, I don't know if they still do that, but anyway, but it's certainly not the case. I don't think they're just trading them back between each other in the same way, but certainly some countries will give their store their gold in this vault. The particular gold bars are apparently not fungible because they have the particular serial numbers on them, right? Although they're weighted really nicely, right? So it's supposed to, because they have the serial numbers in the same way that like a fiat currency does. When a country goes and takes the gold out that they had previously put under the custodial services of the Federal Reserve, they don't get back just a gold bar of the same size and weight. They get back the specific one, right, with that specific serial number. But anyway, that's about it. Thank you for staying around. That's pretty much my presentation, and happy to take any questions.
Perfect. So now I'm doing a little bit of curation of the questions from the people in the audience. So there's one questions on the chain analysis tool that came around, and in that it sounded like a fantastic way of preventing any anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism. What do you think about the use of such tools for AML purposes, and how do you think actually potentially they will evolve coming into the future with relations to cryptocurrencies?
That sounds like more of a philosophical question, which I would hope, or the first part of it anyway, I would hope to avoid a little bit, to be honest. Whether I like them or don't like them, I certainly like competition in currency, and we certainly know that I can certainly expect, it's reasonable to expect that nation states will use these analytical services more and more. Yeah.
Perfect. You've in the early stages of the presentation, you talked about several other properties of money beyond fungibility. Have you put your framework of analysis against other properties of money with relation to cryptocurrencies?
No, certainly not to the same extent. I've certainly thought that I should probably go and do that. That would be really interesting. This could end up being like, I mean, in the future, it would be good as like maybe a single chapter in a book on all the properties of money, right? I don't expect I'll ever write that book, but no, I haven't. Not to the same extent. I've thought a little bit about this or that, but no, I haven't applied it to the same extent. The reason I got into fungibility was just that people kept mentioning to me, and I kept reading online that Bitcoin was fungible. I didn't hear people saying that Bitcoin is portable, things like that. So this led me to this particular presentation.
If you did have the time to write about these other properties of money, which one would you pick next to actually to investigate further?
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know, maybe programmable. That's a property of money that never used to exist, and now it does. Programmable. You didn't used to be able to program money. You were confined to just the characteristic that nature provided in the seashells that it would throw at you from on the shores, that kind of thing, right? But programmable, I find it particularly interesting because the sky's the limit. One thing I find particularly interesting, and I'd like to know the extent to which the incentive structure could keep the programmability, the wide range of things that you could possibly program. One thing I find particularly interesting is if Bitcoin's incentive structure is solid enough to sustain pressure that it might receive in the future in the Bitcoin community to raise the total amount of total Bitcoins that you can create, which right now is 21 million. I suspect as we get closer to 2040 or around then, people are going to say, "Oh, come on, you don't want a limit, do you?" And I suspect that people with existing Bitcoins will want each individual unit that they have to be worth even more. So you'll want them to restrict the supply. I would find that an interesting. I should write about that soon. I should spend more time thinking about it and then write about it soon. I can't hear you anymore.
Sorry. I have a question as well from the audience with regards to estate channels and a second layer solution, particularly with the Bitcoin network. So do you think that the second layer solutions like the Lightning Network will make Bitcoins or Satoshis more fungible? And
Wow.
And if you do, if you can provide a little bit of why? Yeah.
That's interesting. I know. Okay, we either had to increase the block size or we had to have an off-chain solution, right? So I see utility in Bitcoin Cash, and I see utility in off-chain solutions like the Lightning Network. How that applies to fungibility, I haven't spent much time thinking about it yet, so I won't waste anybody's time just spitting out stuff that I haven't thought about much.
Feel free to speculate if you have any thoughts, even if they are thoughts. But
no, maybe not.
yeah.
No, sorry. I can't hear you anymore.
I've got a question here relating to the use of cigarettes as cigarettes and stamps being used in the prisons. And do you think that there is any chance, especially with people having like mobile phones and still being in prison, that
like what?
People that actually have access to mobile phones and internet being in prison, is there any chance that actually crypto could actually become as fungible as cigarettes and stamps in a prison environment?
That it would become about fungibility? I don't know.
Or any studies that you know that actually.
Oh, okay. Well, I do know this. Okay, so the same book that I didn't mention the name of. It's called I think it's called Hidden Order, by is that the one? Might be the one, by David Scarbeck, and that's one. He's a George Mason University graduate economist, and he writes about. I think the subtitle of that book is something like The Hidden Order of America's Prison System, or something like that. Maybe that can help you find a book. If not, send me an email or something. in that book, he mentions that that again, like I said earlier, that in 2005, when the California prison system decided that they were going to outlaw cigarettes, stamps quickly came to replace cigarettes. And I think in like the next paragraph after he says that, he explains that that the California prison, in just one prison, they monitored all the signals, the electronic signals going in and out for of a particular prison for I don't know, for just one day or something, and they found, I don't remember, some ridiculous amount of signals in and out of phone calls, text messages, internet traffic. So it was like it seemed like just about everybody had access to the outside world through the internet and through cellular phones. So if that's one measure, I don't know how the California prison system is effective at banning cigarettes, but not effective at banning internet access and cell phones. It doesn't make any sense to me. But it did also mention that some people just had their own SIM card. Some people didn't even have their own phones, but as long as you can hide a tiny little SIM card, you can borrow someone else's phone or pay them in ramen noodles or stamps or cigarettes to use their cell phone for a little while. I found that interesting.
Awesome. In terms of, like, I have a question on Gresham law, and whether you think that actually the law applies to cryptocurrency in practice, as you've used the example during your presentation.
Interesting. I hadn't applied it much to cryptocurrency, but I mean, it would. It all the previous cases I've spent any time about thinking about it, it's applied. It applies to the $quarter coins when the U.S. Got rid of the silver, and then now did the gold, and then did the copper. It applies whether the state's doing it or not. So in the prison system, you'll notice that the cigarettes that are preferred less for smoking, being the machine rolled cigarettes, that those are the ones that people want to spend as currency. Meanwhile, they want to smoke the more carefully hand rolled ones. Right. I don't know why it wouldn't apply to cryptocurrencies. So yeah, I'd have to think about it more, but certainly. Oh, well, actually, of course it would. If someone, you'd have to go, all right, an empiricist would say, all right, let's test this. And I'd be interested to see actual tests that people do. But logically, certainly, if people prefer less, people would prefer less to hold on to coins that they know might be rejected in the future, right? So if you've got tainted coins, which ones are you going to spend first? All things being equal, you'll spend the ones that are tainted, and you'll keep the other ones for, you'll spend them for people you don't, if you don't know a particular merchant, and you'll take your tainted coins, spend it there, and maybe keep the non-tainted coins and spend those with people that you definitely want to give them legit coins, like your friends or something. Those you'll spend elsewhere where your reputation matters less, that kind of thing.
Right.
And sorry. We did see Gresham's law at work. Remember, we've got different market prices. We've got when I told you my friend used to own a Bitcoin mining pool, and someone came to him and said, hey, I'll pay you more than one Bitcoin for each single Bitcoin that you give me. We certainly see two different values. And what is that? That's Gresham's law. People are trying to get rid of the tainted ones and get the new ones, right?
So in that same wavelength, do you think then that the future of privacy coins have a potential brighter future to be able to allow for that property of fungibility, like the case that you mentioned about Monaro?
Okay, let me say, this is a bit of speculation. I don't have a crystal ball or anything, but I certainly think a couple of things will happen. One is that the more governments are using blockchain analytical services to watch everybody's transactions online, and the more that payment processors such as BitPay care, even when the merchants don't care whose coins they get, certainly people will prefer more and more two things. One is if they still use Bitcoin, they'll prefer, if they could get them. People will increasingly care more than they do now. They'll want some non-tainted coins for Bitcoin, and I suspect there will be a push more in the direction of more privacy coins. I don't know if that answers your question, but I hope it does. I think it does.
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah. Cool. Yeah, I would like to. Yeah, so I would like just to remind the audience. Probably take a couple more questions from the audience before we wrap up the call today. I have another one. In terms of do you have any other interesting stories relating to money fungibility, not necessarily in the realm of cryptocurrencies only, that you would like to share? Any anecdotes? Anecdotes like the ones for cigarettes and stamps.
I don't have any more stories than that. I'm sorry, but I haven't looked up the historical cases, but certainly it always comes up in the context of coin debasement, when a government or its central bank in modern banking, if they debase their whether it's coins or what have you, when in fact they do debase it, after a while people notice, maybe immediately they notice, and so what they want to do is they want to get rid of the they want, for spending, if the king says they're both worth equal value, people want to spend the one that is worth less to them individually, but that the merchant is required by law to accept equal to the one that's got the full gold or the full silver. I don't have too many historical cases. I'm sorry about that.
No problem. I have another question from the audience. Can someone who receives Monero or related privacy coins later on reveal the history of the coins?
No, that's my understanding is no. When I did a little bit of research a couple of years ago trying to understand fungibility and how it might apply to Monero, that's the thing. You can't, unless something changed. I haven't followed it in a couple of years, but that's the thing. You're not supposed to be able to. And Monero is just the example. I think the two big the most popular privacy coins are Monero, the XMR code, and Zcash, ZEC code. So these are the two that I analyzed more closely. But there might be other cryptocurrencies that indeed have even more privacy than Monero. And the reason I say that is that Monero, remember, it does have an optional transparency. If you go out of your way to share with someone a view key, they can indeed go to the blockchain explorer for Monero, enter that view key and some other code, I forgot what it's called, and they can see all the previous transactions, but none of the future transactions. It might be the case that another privacy coin, doesn't even allow you to do that. So that other one, assuming all the technology holds up and it doesn't get compromised, it might indeed be a more fungible currency, because it would be truly homogeneous, because you can't possibly know anything about it, right? About its history. Yeah.
I have a kind of like a wrap-up question, which is kind of personal from the audience. So, due to the fungibility aspects of Monero, does it qualify Monero as your personal favorite crypto coin or not?
Yes and no.
I mean, to answer if you.
No, yes and no. I mean, I don't use it, but yes and no. I care more about the economic implications of it and economic analysis of it rather than using it. I don't use it, but I like the idea of full privacy. I like that. But one thing about Monero is I think that if you're using Monero, if I'm not mistaken, you have to be running a full node, right? I don't remember the current blockchain size of Monero, but it's probably not something you carry around on your phone. So to that extent, it's unless you want to connect, unless you're one of these gurus that know how to connect to like a full node that you run at home and send your transactions through that. And I'm not one of, that's not where my tech level is. Unless you're one of those people, it's probably not so portable, right? Remember, portable is one of the characteristics of money, the properties of money. So maybe under that analysis, maybe it doesn't score so highly on portability.
Perfect. Okay. With that in mind, I would like to wrap up our webinar for tonight. Thanks a lot to our guest speaker, Emile. It's been amazing. There's so many things that we've learned tonight, and I'll also I'll leave just a message to the audience. If you have any outstanding burning questions that you'd like to send us or to send Emile, we're going to be posting here and a follow-up message, so you can actually be in touch with us and send your questions, and we're going to passing them all to Emile. Have a good night, everyone, and enjoy your dinner if you haven't had yet.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
See you to the next webinar by the Blockchain NZ, and thanks for our presenter and Victoria and all the team behind it as well. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.